Now let's take a closer look at our timeline. Come down here into the timeline panel. Most likely the first button you see here will be the visibility button. I want to take a moment to show you that you can arrange the timeline window to suit your own working style. For example, I could click and drag these visibility switches all the way over to this side if I preferred. I could put them over here beside the blending modes. So it's up to you how you like working. But this first group of buttons here, pretty straightforward. You got your visibility switches. They work just like visibility switches in Photoshop or Illustrator. Next is a little audio icon, and you see this switch is grayed out for these layers because none of these layers have audio. But if one of these was an audio layer, or if it was, say, a QuickTime movie with an audio track, you'd be able to mute the audio by clicking that switch. The next switch is the solo switch. The solo switch is pretty handy. It will let you temporarily turn off the visibility of all the other layers. So if I solo the TV, the other two layers are no longer visible. Once I unsolo the TV, the visibility of the other two layers comes back. You can also solo multiple layers if you want, if I just want to look at those two layers. So solo is handy. The next little button is the lock button. So if I lock the TV, now you see it won't let me select the TV. Can't select it in the comp window, can't select it in the timeline. So this can be handy. If you have layers that you don't need to animate, you could go ahead and lock those so that you can't accidentally move them or mess them up. Or if you've had layers that you're done working with, go ahead and lock them again so you won't accidentally disturb them. The next thing you'll see here is a color label for the layer. This can be handy. We have a very simple composition here with just a few layers, but you can easily have a composition that has 50 or even 100, 200 layers in it. And let me unlock that. By changing the label color, see, I changed this one to yellow. Now this entire layer is yellow now. It makes it easy to quickly identify certain layers. So you can color code layers that way. Next, you see the layer number. Something worth pointing out here is the top layer is always layer 1. So for example, you see right now, the TV is layer 1, but if I drag it down here, it now becomes layer 2, and the DV naked blue layer is layer 1. So whatever layer is on top is always going to be layer 1. This next little column here is the blending modes. These blending modes work exactly like the blending modes in Photoshop. We've already used blending modes in an earlier video to put this layer 2 in overlay mode. The drop down next to that is the track matte drop down. We'll talk more about this in a later video, so let's just skip over this for now. Another important component of the timeline are our switches, and we don't see those up right now. But if you look right down below the blending modes, you'll see this toggle switches modes button. If you click that button, our blending modes go away, and now the switches column appears. And we can just toggle that back and forth from blending modes to switches by clicking that button. This just kind of saves space for us, saves real estate. We could have both the switches and modes open at the same time if we wanted. For example, you can pull up or hide any column that you want from the timeline. Like here, I'll hide the parent column. Just right click in the title bar area here and say hide this. Now it's gone. If we want to bring it back, we can right click anywhere in the title bar area, go to columns, parent, and now it's back. So I could right click in here and pull up the switches, or we already have the switches up, pull up the modes. So now you can see here's the switches and the modes at the same time. Typically I don't do that because it's just handy having the little switches modes toggle switch. Okay, so now that we have our switches up, let's look at the first switch here. This is called the shy switch, and the shy switch is another tool that's really handy when you're working with a lot of layers. It can become very confusing and cumbersome. You spend a lot of time scrolling up and down your timeline window to try to find the layer that you're looking for. The shy switch can be really handy. And so let me explain what the shy switch does. You can see the icon looks like a little guy peeping over a fence or something. So these layers are unshied. So let's shy these two background layers, the DV naked blue and the DV edge. Notice now the icon changed to look like the little guy ducked down behind the fence. He's hiding. He's shy now. But nothing seemed to happen. You didn't see anything change in the timeline. To see the effects of the shy switch, you have to hit the master shy switch up here on the top of your timeline. And what this does is it will hide any layers that you have shied. So I've shied these two layers. So when we hit the master shy switch, they've disappeared. Now this isn't the same as turning off the visibility or soloing layers, because you can still see the layers, see those two background layers in the composition, but we don't see them in the timeline. So they're still there. They're still there. We just don't see them listed in our timeline. So this can be handy for cleaning up your timeline and hiding layers that you don't really need to deal with. You want to bring them back, just uncheck the shy switch and they're back. The rest of these switches, continuous rasterization, motion blur, 3D, we'll be talking about these features in later videos. So for now, let's skip over here to the parenting column. Again, we're going to have a whole lesson on parenting, so we're just going to skip over that for right now. For now, if you want to increase the amount of real estate, you could just hide the parenting column for now while we're not using it. Then the majority of our timeline here is, represents the time in our animation. So this little yellow triangle with the red line, this is our time indicator. This shows us the current time that we're looking at. So I drug it down in the timeline. You can see the time code here is now updated to display 15 frames. So this tells me that now I'm looking at frame 15. We don't have any animation going on in this comp, so it looks just the same as frame 0. But this is how you navigate through time in your animation, by dragging your time indicator forward or backward in the timeline. Wherever you see a layer, that layer is going to be visible in the comp window. So what I mean is, let's say we don't want to see this television until 1 second into our animation. I could move my time indicator down to 1 second. We can literally select and slide this layer to the right, and if I hold down Shift, the end point of that layer will snap to the time indicator. So notice we no longer see that layer here from 0 to 1. The layer doesn't start until 1 second. So now if we drag our time indicator backwards, our television has disappeared. So our television doesn't appear until 1 second into the animation.